Hello, everyone out there. Let's see if we can get this started. So, tonight is a rebroadcast. A friend of mine, Morgan Whiting, an activist who lives in Louisville, Kentucky, where Breonna Taylor was murdered by the police, is my guest this evening. This is, as I said, a rebroadcast. So, she was um, actually a guest in October of 2022. So, here we go. Hey everyone.
And I only hear one of us. This is good.
You hear me? Yep,
I,
yep. I think we're good.
I think we're good tonight. Oh, so, um, Morgan, I want to thank you for being my guest tonight or our guest tonight on Love Over Coffee. Voices Not Heard. This is a platform for the marginalized, the silenced, and the abused. Morgan has been my guest once before. In fact, it was a year ago and one day because I
Wow.
saw in my memories where you had been my guest on October 4th last year. So
Wow.
I want to take a moment and welcome you. Usually, I always start with the same question, and that is tell us who you are, tell us where you've been, and tell us where you're going. And I
I
know
like
for
that.
you, it's been a year, so some people really don't know who you are. So let's
Yeah.
begin there.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad to be back here. I really enjoyed my time last time and love being able to share information with everyone who's watching. So thank you all for attending and for the support. Uh, my name is Morgan Rumpel Whiting, and I live in Louisville, Kentucky. I live with my partner and two dogs and three cats. So lots of pets. Um, I where have I been? I think really my story of my journey starts from before I was even born. I am an transracial adoptee. So I was born and adopted to a white family that I grew up in Southern Indiana, and I grew up in a household with two moms. Um, I I think that that's really important to my story because where I'm going really ties even into that initial moment of life. I grew up in a very white conservative community, and being a person of color with two moms was came with its
Probably not the norm.
not the norm.
Not the
No.
norm. I'm
Now, what's
just going
funny
to
about that,
assume.
what's funny about that, Tina, is like for the longest time growing up, I didn't know that that wasn't really normal. Like
Mm,
I just assumed like uh, not even necessarily that people had maybe two moms or two dads, but I didn't think that like my family was different in a way that like we were going to face discrimination
well, and
and rejection.
that's why I think that as much as we want to try to explain things, um, genetically, some things, we have
Hmm.
to look at the nurture idea because so many things are taught and it does become your norm. And so for you, it didn't seem strange, but to
Yeah.
someone looking in, it was different. But you didn't know that. That's
Yeah,
why
I did it.
you're taught then that there's
Yes.
something wrong with this unit,
Yep. Yep.
whereas if you weren't
Exactly.
taught that,
Exactly.
then where would the problem be?
Exactly. Which that's why I like to share this part of my story because I think about like kids are amazing. Like, again, I didn't know there was anything, and not until someone told me that, like, I don't like you because you're different. And then I'm like, wait a minute, what? I'm different. Like, yeah, my family looks different, but like, love it, the love you get from your family, like, it's so, I think it's important, especially as I move like into being a survivor. So that's really what I faced growing up. I eventually found out very quickly that I was different. My family was different, and I was treated differently. When I got to college, things changed a bit because I started seeing more people that looked like me. At the same time that I was in my college years, that's when I was also, I met the person who has caused me harm. And I met them at a time where I was trying, things with my family wasn't great. It's still not great, because I'm different than the rest of my family. So like, the things that I'm going through are not the things that they've been through, and we can't kind of meet, if you will. And so, that being said, I had a skewed way of knowing what love was. And I also think that's important, not because I blame myself for what I experienced, but because I didn't necessarily see the signs that, like, this wasn't good for me, because I was looking for love. And that's
That's
what a
what we
lot of,
talked about last night. You don't
yeah,
know what you don't know. And
right.
so, what you've grown up with thinking love is, or how it's been expressed to you, whether that was good or bad,
Mhm.
you then go on to search for it or look for it or find it in
Right,
ways that may not be healthy, but you don't know.
right. And I again, all of this really plays into my where I'm going. So I like the way that you asked this
I
question, because
understand.
I'm like, it's building up. So
We're
I was,
driving there.
yep. So I was in a harmful relationship for about 3 years. The person that I was with was, and I would say for the most part, kind of continues to be a prominent person in our city. He in 2020, we were both very much involved in movement spaces, and after the murder of Breonna Taylor, and that is when stuff really became heightened for me. I didn't really, and I think it's really important to be transparent. For the longest time, me, being in a relationship with a harmful person at towards the end of my college years, and I then transitioned into working directly with survivors of sexual and interpersonal violence. And I would sit down and talk to them about what violence looks like, why, what might be going on in a relationship that isn't healthy, while simultaneously being in a relationship like that myself. And I think about that a lot. And honestly, I didn't even notice that that was happening until years later when I came forward. I came forward because the proximity between the person that caused me harm and myself was getting closer and closer, and I felt unsafe. And what I found is that, like, we all know, power, when you position yourself in positions of power, it's very hard for people to see fault in you. And as I would consider myself a very abolitionist type person. So I never once said, I want this person locked up. Now, since coming forward, there have been a number of people who have come forward about this individual. If that's what they want, that's fine. Like, I'm not saying, like, just because I'm saying he shouldn't be locked up doesn't mean that if that's something they see. Like, we all had our own experiences with this individual. But for me, all I wanted was my community to say, violence has occurred. How are we going to address it moving forward so that people stay safe? And unfortunately, my community failed at that. And I've been very outspoken about how my community has let me down, thus letting down many people who have experienced harm just from one individual. So the harm that's happening in our communities I'm just one of so many.
Well,
And
and the
just,
whole Breonna Taylor, I mean, it was such a summer of so many things for so many
yes,
people.
yes,
And so it almost is like everything became a symbol of something, something, something. And
Yep.
it was hard to figure out, were you on the, because the media, were you on the side of the peaceful protests, or were you on the side of the by any means necessary protest, and were you on this side, and were and there was a lot going on.
Yep. And I was on the side of, if we're going to intentionally rebuild what has been broken, or build, I won't even say rebuild, like we are just starting fresh in a lot of these things, like,
It was
there's a lot
never
of things
built
we got to
before.
start right, we got to start completely over, like, I mean, not even ground zero, like before that. So if we're going to do this, then we need to be having intentional conversations together about how are we going to address harm that's even being caused amongst our own movement community. And I couldn't get people, I couldn't get a lot of people. I will say there were people, and there still are people that are in my corner and in other survivors' corners. But the vast majority of people said that's just too much. That's too complicated. I don't want to call out my own people. And therefore people have been able to continue harming. And so that was really unfortunate to me. Tina, I know we talked about this last time too, but I just think that shows that we're just feeding into the same systems that are already
Right.
created.
Well, I think every organization that comes about, whether it be black owned or white owned, because we've all been indoctrinated by the same philosophies and systemic racism called white supremacy. How do we not recreate it?
Right.
How does our organizations not recreate the exact same system? Because we all have been impacted. So
Yep.
I know that as a white person, there's always someone at the top, and everyone falls in line for the power dynamic. But I also know that in the black culture, I know I attended an NAACP meeting one time, and there was a man there who was there to take a vote of the nominees that night for president. And he said, and at first I was taken aback, because I'm a white person observing, and so white person observing needs to step back. And I was observing, and he said, we're the only organization that multiplies by dividing. And it took me a moment, and I realized he's talking about the whole divide and conquer, which was something brought to the black community from the white side, which is you stand over here, you stand over here, and if you two are arguing about who should be in the middle, guess who's in the middle? Me, the white person. And so when he said we're the only organization that multiplies by division, because there was a very clear line that night in that room, and you could feel the tension. And I took that statement and I just thought about it, and then I thought about what it means, what it really means. And so, like I said, every organization gets recreated by the same dynamic that we don't know how to undo.
Yes. So. Beautifully said. Beautifully said, Tina. Like, yep. Look, see, and this is why we found each other.
That's why we found each other.
I don't have to explain to you. So no, yes, exactly. So facing that was really difficult, because that meant coming forward put a lot of us in danger, and we weren't able to be active in movement space like we wanted because of that. And so I would say in 2020, it was a really difficult year for me, because I lost a lot of my community, just in general. And I lost family. I lost a lot of people that year for multiple reasons, whether it was coming out as survivor or being black. And I was like, these are two things I cannot change. So what am I supposed to do? But what I wasn't doing was not going to lose sight of who I am, which is, I feel like what people want you to do, because then you're easier to control. So I chose not to do that. And even to this day, like there's a lot of people I had in my life 2 years ago that I'll probably never speak to again. And I had to grieve through that, still losing people. Despite of how you lose them, you're still losing them.
Right,
So
absolutely. And that's hard, especially
mhm,
when there's really almost not a conversation to be had because I mean, you're on that side and I'm on this side. I mean, there's no there's no bridge. Sometimes there's no bridge. And
yep,
unless the two people want to build a bridge and there's a reason to build a bridge, it never gets built.
exactly. Yep. So no one's even showing up to do the work
Right.
to build it. So
Right. Right.
um,
That's yeah.
yeah. So from that experience, what I really focused on was trying to develop ways that we could have conversations about kind of just like what we've been talking about, Tina, with, look, I'm not trying to rebuild a criminal justice system, like, because criminal justice systems do harm to people in general. I just overall, like, they're just harmful to people, but like then you get into Black, brown, queer, all those different identities, survivors, and it's even it multiplies the impact it has on you.
Right.
So like I'm not trying to do that anymore. I'm trying to look at ways that we can still hold people accountable, but in ways that are proactive and long term to stability of a community. So, you know, with the criminal justice system, we're just taking Black and brown bodies off the street and just disrupting families and disrupting. What we're not doing is addressing the real problems like poverty and racism and homophobia and all of those things. We're just like, we're not going to talk about how we do that. We're just going to throw
And
people
the
in jail.
system without I think sometimes knowing or maybe not caring. I don't know. I don't want to say they don't care, but they re-traumatize. They
Yeah.
just keep re-traumatizing families and survivors and Black men, and they just keep re-traumatizing, and then they expect for there to be some change or
Yeah.
some improvement. And I'm
Right.
thinking, but you keep doing the same thing over and over again. That's the definition of insanity. It's also the definition
Exactly.
of generational trauma.
Yep.
You've been doing
Exactly.
this forever.
Yep. And like to that point, Tina, when I first came forward, I can't tell you how many people, and I'm not like I'm talking people who would identify as an advocate. I'm talking people who would identify as survivor leaders, people who movement leaders, people who are literally down at the square with me saying, like, what happened to Breonna Taylor through the criminal justice system. So all of those people who are preaching one thing are coming to me and saying, well, I don't believe you because you didn't call the police. And I'm sitting there like, are you not paying attention? Like, what? I'm like, my question would typically be, why do you think I didn't call the police? Just look at me. Like, you don't have to know anything else about me. Why do you think I didn't call the police? Period. And you're basing your belief off what happened to me as to whether or not I called. And those are people who would identify as like advocates. And I'm like, wait a minute.
Right.
You're missing, you're not seeing me as a whole person.
Ones who should know what the system looks like and how it identifies people.
Well, and the work that we've done, like in our working with survivors, and what I have seen happen to survivors who do report, do call the. I mean, I talk to people about that all the time. I'm like, if people see what happens to survivors when they go into a courtroom, who would want to come forward? You all, like, and this is what I'm talking about. Like, we need to talk about this. You all want, you want to increase the number of people that you lock up for rape and prosecution, but you're not even making it so that people can come forward. So anyway, I just, to your point, there are reasons why people who are marginalized don't call the cops. And it's such, and people know that until someone who they know causes harm, and then they're like, you should have called the police.
Right.
Like, wait a minute. So anyway, so coming out of that, I really focused on how do we talk about transformative justice? How do we talk about building community instead of funneling the criminal justice system? So really what I focus on now is, number one, I work with different agencies to say, okay, who's not coming through your door? Because that was another thing that
Mm-hmm.
I found as a survivor. It was really difficult for me to find providers who looked like me, therapists, counselors,
Yeah.
anybody who looked like me.
I'm in the education system. There aren't teachers.
Yeah. Oh,
If
yeah.
there are black and brown people in the school, they are in safe,
Yep.
the in school suspension. They are the person that talks to the kid when they've done the worst that day.
Yep.
It's like a jailer.
Yeah.
Okay. The cafeteria. It's the
Yep.
same stereotypical role.
What
No one
message
is
is that sending? What message is that?
How do you aspire to be more than you are when you see no one who has
Nope.
aspired to be more than you are who looks like you?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's so intentional. It's so
It is
intentional.
intentional. Yeah.
I remember when growing up in my old white community, I remember when I told my principal where I was going to go to college, and his response was, well, I hope you have money growing on a tree. Now, he didn't say that once to any white students. You know what I mean? Like, never. But me, who I'm like, oh, yeah, I would like to go to college. Now, well, I know you can't afford that. Wow. 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 So anyway, yes, so that funnels into like, what do you see as perceived reality as a black and brown person? And what I saw as a survivor was, deal with it. There's not going to be people in these different organizations that are going to help you or that look like you. So just deal with your trauma. And then people wonder why there's so much generational trauma in black and brown communities. It's because we just have to deal with it. And so anyway, I work with agencies to have conversations about who's not coming in the doors. And the question is not what's wrong with them. It's what do you need to do so they can even reach the handle of that door. And people don't like to talk about that because, we love to say we're woke. And I'm like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
But you're still living in a dream world.
Yeah. I'm like, it was so, yeah. So, what do you mean by that you're woke? And I think that there's often a lot of performance in addressing diversity and equity and being, like, I think we're past the, like, I have a black friend, but now people are like, well, we have black staff. Yeah, but your black staff leave your agency at 75% the rate that your white staff do in turnover. That's a problem.
And there are 4 words that I feel like we try to use: diversity, inclusion, equity, and justice. Diversion and inclusion are really on the low end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
If you're not going for the equity and justice,
Yep.
then you and I are diverse and you and I can be included.
Yep.
But if we're not trying to get to the point of equity and justice, then we're dancing around the same circle.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what I see.
And that's like a ding ding, like when an agency will be like, well, we're inclusive or we're diverse. Well, but what does that mean? Like, again, diverse could just mean that you have some black staff or brown staff or whatever on, but number one, how often are they staying? And number two, do they even feel safe here? So like you just saying like, oh, we hire a lot of black people, but they're leaving because you're not a safe place to work. That's a problem. So you don't get to just, so yes, I completely agree. I saw a picture recently that like broke it down into shoes. It was like, it talked about, being included means that like, you can wear this pair of shoes and people will be like, okay, fine, you can wear those pair of shoes here. But the ultimate one that you wanted to get to was belonging, which is you can wear these shoes without judgment and safe and be safe. And that is where you're trying to get to. And like, so that's what I try to have conversations with people about, is like, there's a reason that Black and brown people are not coming through your doors, because we notice if you don't have people, if the people on your staff don't feel safe, like we're observing all of that. So I like to have questions or conversations with people. And then I think another piece of that I focus on in my work is ensuring that I like to look at how we're addressing kids and youth, because often I feel like kids and youth are just thrown away in many ways, and it's getting younger and younger. I've been co-facilitating or co-consulting with a college recently, and my co-facilitator recently was talking about how one of the highest rates of kids who are getting put into detention are Black preschool boys. Black preschool boys. Yet what we talk about in this work is that, how do you, indicators that you could potentially be a problematic child is that if you've had school discipline. But you're talking about preschool boys, Black boys. I'm wondering if you're even paying attention to the white boys in the class. I think that you probably walked in and already had a bias and said that the Black kids are probably going to be the problem. And so these are the kids.
I see
it's the same thing with adults. Like, that's why we see over policing in the ghetto, is because it's already been predetermined that like Black people in the ghetto are more dangerous. So we need to have more eyes on them. And it's also interesting because another study that came out they were child actors, and my co-facilitator talks about this, and they bring people in to kind of watch these kids, and they notice or take note of there's a Black boy, a white girl, and a Black girl. And they notice how much the educators are paying attention specifically to the Black boy, and like are noticing the things that he's doing wrong, while often the white boy is getting noticed, and sometimes the white girl, like on things that you're doing right, but they're not catching the things that they're doing wrong. But what was really interesting is that the Black girl was almost never noticed. No one was paying attention to her. And I think that that's, I firmly believe that kind of stuff spirals all the way up to,
oh, absolutely.
are we forgetting to serve Black survivors, especially Black
And so
women?
I learned as a little white girl in a classroom to do all the right things, to get the pats on the head,
Yep.
to be the teacher's pet, to do all the things that would endear me to the teacher if I was ignored. But I also went to predominantly white schools all my life. And I learned that the Black and brown kids who went to our school, they were brought in, so to speak, to show that we had some diversity. So
see, and that's where did you go to school, Tina?
I actually went to private school in Lexington. Now, my father, I was basically middle class. So my father would wait until he got his taxes in the spring to pay for the whole year. Okay, because we couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
But the three siblings had all gone to schools that were public and had a lot of issues. And so my father decided I was going to have a different experience. So I already was different from my family as well, because I'm the only one to have graduated high school and went on to college, whereas all the siblings dropped out in like 10th grade. Okay. So I was already being pushed to that people pleasing thing, which is more than likely why I also became a victim of abuse, but on the opposite side of why. because I didn't want to cause any trouble. I just wanted to,
Yeah. Yeah.
exist and be ignored. And,
Yep.
I grew up in a household with a dad yelling at 2 o'clock in the morning when the siblings were misbehaving. And I'm thinking to myself, if they would just follow the rules, the house could be quiet, you know, because I was far enough behind them. When I was
Yeah.
10, they were 15, 16, and 18. They were
Yeah.
right at the prime age. So, see, yeah. So, white girls, little white girls, the people pleasing, and then, yeah. And I
Yeah.
see the black and brown kids
Yeah.
every day being focused on.
Yes. Yes. Well, and I think I hear that a lot with like referring to black people as well. If they would just follow the rules, then then the police wouldn't have
Right,
to
right,
kill them. And I'm always
right.
like, wait a minute, we are so disconnected. And the fact that we put justification like
Right.
that, into ending a life, it's just
So, what about survivors, Morgan? Do they,
Mhm.
because I know from the white perspective, I get a lot of the, well, you shouldn't have gone to that apartment, or you shouldn't have gone to that place, or you shouldn't have worn that outfit. Is it the same for survivors in the black and brown community, or do they hear something different as to what they shouldn't have done? What do you,
Well, yeah, yeah, and of course, like I can't speak for everybody, but just in my experience of like seeing how it's played out for black and brown communities and just what I've observed, I would say that sometimes that stuff may come up, like what were you wearing, but I think more often, especially black women, we're already sexualized in a way that like
mm,
they are we already deserve it just because we're a black woman, like, and then on top of that, maybe ask what you're wearing, but you were probably being promiscuous, so am I even going to ask you that? Like, that's not even I'm just going to assume that you were probably wanting it, kind of thing.
yeah, yeah,
I think that there's often this idea that I have heard people in like professional roles who have said that we black couples and families are just violent towards each other, so we're not going to necessarily, that's just how they are. That's just how they are. I
so when
feel
the
like that.
police come, someone's going to jail, or both are going to jail, someone's going to jail.
Mhm.
When the police come, someone's going to jail,
Yep.
is what
Yep.
the,
Yep. Well, and I think a really good example, and this is like data you can look up, but when it comes to like human trafficking, for example, white girls, like if a trafficking victim who is white is picked up, or there's a sting or something like that, they are more likely to be given services, whereas black girls are more likely to be locked up for the exact same, not experience, obviously, but victimization. They're
mhm,
both being
mhm,
trafficked,
mhm.
but the white girl is offered services where the black girl is put in jail. And again, I think that comes down, I mean, it definitely obviously comes down to racism, but it's this idea that like, oh, you didn't deserve that, let us help you, versus what were you probably had it coming. So
So what do you say to people who hear you say it's obviously racism, and they say no, it isn't? Do you, do you, because at this point I know I'm like, I just can't have this conversation with you because I don't know. I don't know. It's like if you can't see it, I don't know how to help you see it.
yeah,
But I get very frustrated.
yeah,
But what do you do
yeah.
when people say that?
Well, so there's a couple of things. It depends on the setting. So first of all, like I do a training about color blindness on
Mm,
how the whole I don't see color, everybody's the same. impacts the way that we provide services for different communities. And one of the things I do in that training is I do like a historical walkthrough of just like 1600s to now. And I don't have enough time to cover all of history, right? But the purpose of doing that for a group of individuals that I know are walking into a room and are probably anywhere from like, I'm not colorblind because colorblindness is detrimental, because you do have some people, but most likely a lot of people walking into the room are sometimes in that middle of like, I don't really, I mean, I think colorblindness is a good thing. Like it's good not to see someone's color, blah, blah, blah. And so I try to walk in with a, how am I going to get people on like a neutral, or not neutral, but like the same page at least, so that we
Right.
can further
Right.
look at policy and procedures. So what I do is I do like a miniature historical walkthrough. And the purpose of that is that I want to show you, just in history, just through factual history, how we have built racism into literally the makeup of everything in this country. Everything. Housing, laws, I mean, all of it. So I want to show you in the 80s how data shows that Black and whites were using cocaine at the same rates, but blacks were 20% more likely to go to jail, even though whites were using and selling at the exact same rate.
And
So
now
because of
flip
that,
that. And now flip that.
yeah, yeah,
Now we want to treat the addicted as though, because now we realize how many whites are addicted, and now we see it differently. And it's like,
yeah,
in the 80s, it was mandatory sentences, and now
right.
it's
Yep,
treat them.
yep, exactly, exactly, exactly. So one of the things I show through discussing like just that statistic on cocaine usage is they use that, even though it's the same rates, they use, well, you can see that more Black people are in jail, thus more dangerous and more likely to do drugs. So we need to have more police presence. And from the outside looking in, like you can see how people would get there, like just based on what they were told and fed by society, which were lies. But because of that, they're like, well, we should have more police presence. So we literally built in justification for what led up to the murder of Breonna Taylor. Like we justified it through history. And so I try to show people like how we literally built in, or I'll also talk about welfare, where with welfare, when it first came out, had all these rules. One of the rules is that you could not have a man in your house after midnight. That was a rule. If you did, and they found that you had a man in your house after midnight, you had all of your benefits stripped from you, which is unconstitutional. But here we are. That's what they did. However, they exclusively did those raids in Black communities, Black, brown communities. They were never, were they knocking on a rich white person's door and being like at midnight, do you really?
No.
I mean, that's just funny. Like,
First,
no, they
the
weren't
assumption
doing
is,
that.
would the white family be on welfare?
Oh, well, so yeah, that too. Like, there's obviously that, yeah, that they wouldn't even be on welfare anyway. So they were exclusively doing this in Black communities, thus stripping Black families of their benefits, which when you now look at generational poverty, like we have literally created that. But not only that, why would Black families potentially have a man in the house who was not their husband after midnight? Maybe it's because we've locked their husbands up and they had to bring in extra help. We did that. So then we did that, then we punished them and stripped them of their benefits. So I literally try to walk people through seeing the genetic, like the makeup of how we made this happen. So that's one approach I take. Like, and again, that's in maybe a more formal setting where I have time to sit down with someone and be like, okay, so we're going to talk history. But you don't get that opportunity all the time. Like you will get people who say that things like the criminal justice system aren't racist. And so, and some opportunities that I have that are less time, I will often I like to ask people why. Why is that? Why do you think that? Why do you think that racism does not exist anymore? XYZ. Typically, to be really frank, people don't really have a good answer or
No,
any
they
answer
don't. No, they
because
don't. You're
they're
right.
because and sometimes that's helpful because when you put it on somebody else and you try to have them explain to you, they can't. And I'm like, I didn't say anything. You're the one. I just let you talk, and you walked yourself to the end result, which is like, oh, okay, well maybe that's just because maybe a president said that a specific
Right.
president said that we don't have racism, like, but maybe I don't know why I believe that. And I feel like that's really where you got to tap into white folks sometimes, is asking them why they believe something.
Well,
Because
because I feel like, I mean, I can wake up in the morning and go to bed at night, and I don't have to think about the fact that I'm white.
mhm,
I can fit in wherever it is I want to go and do whatever it is I want to do. And so for me to understand racism, it's sort of like healing from trauma. I have to have a daily intentional thought and stop thinking about that it doesn't exist and just start seeing it and then start moving towards the change. Because if I'm still trying to figure it out, I'm over here.
yeah,
But if I know it exists, I have to move away from knowing that it exists. I have to move differently. I have to shop black owned businesses. I have to make my own decisions to undo it
yeah,
in the small ways I can,
yeah,
as well as educate others. But if I stay in the white world, my world is going to be all white. That's the,
yeah,
that's the predominance.
yes,
I don't have to
absolutely.
work very hard.
Absolutely. And Tina, I think something you said, which is one piece I think is one of the most important parts of transforming the way that, like, we understand racism. Particularly for this country. It I see the most change occur or shift, maybe mindset shift, when white people call in other white people. Like, it's one thing for me to sit here and try to preach racism to someone, but to be honest, and like, I see it. Like, I see whenever I'm talking about racism with someone,
And you
and often
experience
what
it.
I see is, oh, well, you're just saying, like, this is just because you feel like the world's unfair. Like, in even with good intention, I think it's looked at as like that's personal to you, and it obviously is, because I'm a person
And it
of
should
color.
be.
But whenever, like, a white person says we need to talk about racism, look at all the things that we've lost because of racism. Like, one of the things that my co-facilitator will tell, because their favorite person to reel in are white women, because often white women think that there's like a pass out here, for and one thing that they will say is, you all are not owed any comfort. And they'll talk about what just happened with Emmett Till and the person who lied, and like that person got to live a completely comfortable life,
Hmm. Hmm.
and they're like, you don't get comfort. You don't get comfort for that.
Right.
So what I see often to be really beneficial is true allyship from white folks. And I truly, we need y'all to help the education and reeling them in.
Well, and
So
that's where, community is made up of people who care about each other. And that community comes from within.
mhm,
So rather than a white person coming into that feel good white savior situation, they need to come in from the side and realize that we're all in the same boat trying to row together to the same location.
yep,
Some of us are going to get there because we can afford it. And some of us aren't going to get there because we can't afford it. But that community that can't afford it, who pulls together and takes care of everyone, that's the community that has built that authentic relationship.
Yep.
Because that's where, and I'm glad to hear you also say it's about conversation. It's about engagement, authenticity, and that conversation. Because me knowing you on a more personal level makes me want to fight for you.
Yeah.
Whether it be a Black issue or a survivor issue or a women's issue, it makes me want to say, wait a minute, that's my friend, and that's wrong.
Right. Yes.
No matter where it's coming from.
Yes.
And that's where I don't think we always have
No.
built that bridge, that community, that bridge,
Yeah, absolutely.
that authenticity. It's based on
Absolutely.
authentic conversation.
I couldn't agree more. And I think what we saw in 2020 is a great example of this, because I feel like after the death, particularly of George Floyd, where people could actually see, there was like this, everyone was like, wait a minute, racism exists? And like, so you had people who were like, I think, okay, yeah, like I think there's something wrong. Like we need to
Like,
make
we need
changes.
to look at this a little closer.
But the problem is that I think a lot of people said that, and then there was like no follow-up. And I'm like, see, no, we need to talk about this now. Like we need to have a conversation, not just like, okay, you saw it, like that's great, but this stuff's been going on for
And
centuries.
Breonna
now.
Taylor actually died before George Floyd,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
but she wasn't talked about. She was talked about
No.
in community, but she wasn't talked about on the news.
Yeah.
Which is another whole issue that we could probably bring you back for. And that's what, and I'm glad the conversation went the way it did. But there's also that.
I was just thinking about that. I was like, wait a minute. Wait.
Because there's also that conversation, you know, because last year we talked about, you know, Gabby Petito, young, white, blonde.
I remember
you know,
that. Yeah.
Going on her, you know, world journey with her fiance, and they were both white, and they were both, you know, and my goodness, when she turned up missing, it was like news central. And yet we know that Black and brown disappear all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, some of them get the news a little bit, but some of them are never heard about.
Yep.
And like I said, that's a whole other conversation, because I know I was in journalism and I stopped being in journalism because the very nature of what story they choose to cover and the story they choose not to cover is based on a lot of stereotypes. Because again, the system recreates the system quite easily over and over and over again.
Yep.
And so you have the car wreck, show those pictures, but you got someone who was murdered and no one hears about it.
And it's like, if you started bringing attention to the number of Black and brown people who go missing, or I'll just say let's just say go missing, period. So if like you started doing that, you'd have to humanize us a little. Like,
right.
wait, they face similar things that we do in terms of like going missing. And then, I mean, that would make people have to address injustice. And I just think we're gatekeeping as a society and as a country. We are.
And I think about in general, we show a mugshot versus a high school. We show a mugshot of a Black and brown person, and we show a high school graduation picture of a white kid. And it's like, when you see those, you have a different reaction. It's a visceral reaction. It's like, oh, well, yeah, he's been in jail before. That's immediately where your brain is going to go.
So therefore, it is justified.
Trained.
Yep. So we have justified. And that's what I will tell people after I've talked about the cocaine issue in the 80s and how we over policed. I can't tell you how many people would tell me, well, wasn't Breonna Taylor on drugs? Well, wasn't her boyfriend on drugs? And I'm like, wait a
Right.
minute, wait a minute. Even if they were, you're saying that that's a death sentence? Because I'm sure that your uncle, who
Right.
is currently, you wouldn't say that about him. You wouldn't say that about him. Like, they deserve to die because they were on drugs, because they were Black on drugs, not because they were on drugs. Say it
Well,
as a
and
death
I
sentence.
know from so many people that even a black and brown church versus a white church, and what they see among their young girls when they go through puberty, and what white churches see when their girls go through puberty. I've heard so many black and brown people talk about, um, well, they're just fast, or they're just this, or they're just that. And again, that pushes the whole survivor conversation to a place of, well, they must have done something that got them in that position. Whereas for the white church, it's like, oh my gosh, my pure little white girl. you know
Right,
these are
right.
these are conversations. Again, I mean, the podcast was designed to be those conversations that are hard to have and hard to hear. And
Mhm.
as much as I do focus on the silenced and the abused, I know that even I have a hard time bringing guests on that want to talk about the marginalized side,
Yeah,
because it's putting the Black person in the position to justify
yeah,
that
yeah,
racism really does exist. And you're right, the pressure should be on us as white people, not on the Black people, to make you convinced that it really does happen.
yeah,
And yet that's what usually ends up happening, because it's
yeah,
almost like, it's like the dynamic has already been set up that I'm saying it, but who's going to believe me? And you're saying it, and oh yeah, because you're Black, that's why you're
yep,
saying it. And
yeah,
so the dynamic
yep,
just spins around
yep.
again, and here
Mm-hmm.
we are a year
Mm-hmm.
later, and
And here
one
we,
day,
yep.
a
Right.
year and one day later,
I
you know,
know. I know.
and
But I appreciate you letting the space, because it is hard to talk about. It's hard. And I would say that we're trying to move more and more into, I would say, like, within the sexual violence movement, for example, like, we're there is intention there to try to talk about how racism impacts programming, to laws, to all of that stuff. But the same, it's still we're still in the very early pieces of it. And
well, you think
so,
about it, our nation is still so young,
yeah, yeah.
and we're just now getting to a point where some people who want to say they're woke, but some people are just now shifting to understanding that racism exists. So now it's almost like, okay, so we're at square one.
Yeah,
Because,
yeah, yeah. But I'm just glad to have, like, just as a Black survivor, spaces where, like, I can just show up and literally authentically be who I am. And, like, I'm finding more and more places to plug in professionally. Like, in my new workplace, I feel very safe in many ways.
so tell me about access to freedom. What is that exactly? Because I tried to look it up today, and
So
I didn't really find much. So
yeah, so it's that, I'm glad that you asked that. So the job I was just referring to is, like, my actual full-time job. Um I work for a company who we support people who get funding for human trafficking work. And so I provide, like, training and technical assistance. And so that team has been really great, and I think a safe place as a Black brown person to be. So that's kind of my full-time role. But on the side, I was mentioning doing consulting work with a college, and I also consult with a foster care agency, and I get brought on for maybe different projects or needs that different organizations have. And that's what I do through Access to Freedom. It's not, let's say, I was going to say this, and I was like, this sounds a little it sounds a little into yourself, Morgan, but I honestly haven't had a chance to like do a big marketing push because
So Access to Freedom is you.
yeah, that's me. It's just me. It's just me consulting. Yeah. So like I consult for this college and for access through Access to Freedom. And I've been so busy with it, I haven't developed a lot of the marketing.
Haven't built up all the stuff. I know. I do the same thing. I've got the Love Over Coffee. Do you think we don't have a website either?
I need to one day. But it's also like I want people to be able to find me, but like I'm capped out right now, like with so it's just me. Another survivor leader who does a lot of work with forced marriage. She helped me get she has her own foundation, and she helped me get my organization up and going, which I'm just so grateful for.
If you're looking to hire, I'm over here.
Yeah. I mean, so that's ultimately actually what I would like to move into and within the next year is because I'm like, I'm getting paid to do my consulting, but I'd actually like to make the business lucrative in a way. Right. So because we do need people, and like I can't do it by myself. Like I can't. So we need people who have this mindsets like we do in these conversations, because I want people to have hard conversations with organizations. If you say you want to be anti-racist, then we got to look at your policy procedure.
Well, and that's what I tell people a lot of times too. If you're non-racist, yay, okay. But what are you doing about it? So if you're, it's kind of like I have a black friend and I'm doing anti-racist work. There's a big, long line between those two things. And even the, so if you're on the non-racist side, that's great. But are you on the anti-racist side? Are you, and only black and brown communities can decide if you're on the ally side. But it's like, you got to be moving on the line. You can't be standing still and saying that you're non-racist and saying that you don't see color or I have a black friend. Those are all such low-level ways to fight racism.
I tell people that the difference between being like a support person and an ally is the action. So to be an ally, you actually have to have an action step with that. It can't just be, I treat everyone the same or whatever. I took a seminar or class on like that's all great, but like the allyship is the action step.
Right.
And so you have to, and that you're right. Like black and brown communities, I can have a minute conversation with someone and I can tell you whether they're not an ally, a support person, or an ally very quickly. And it's definitely finding out, it's asking that question, what do you do about it? Right. So I think that, Tina, I've always considered you an ally, and the fact that you have this platform to let us come, that's an action step. But just being and sitting here with you for the last hour, I'm like, that's a sister. So you're always welcome.
Thank you.
It's appreciated.
The ex would not say that, but we have that. Yeah. I was actually that's ex, another whole story, right?
My ex also told me I was anti-black. So, and I was always like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
So, okay.
Like, obviously, you would like the world to know me differently than what you really know. But, but that's okay. Yeah. Well, I want to, of course, you're amazing. You're so genuine. And
Thank you.
I know that even though we're friends, you still push me. And that's a good thing. I think a lot of white people don't want to be pushed. It's like we already know, and we already know what's right and wrong. But really, if you've been indoctrinated by white supremacy, those wheels turn in your head without a thought process. They are so ingrained now. And so building an authentic relationship with someone of color, it pushes you. And if it
Mhm.
doesn't push you, then you're not listening. I'm just going to say that.
No,
Yeah.
you said it.
If it doesn't push you, you're not listening. I don't know what planet you're on or where you think you are, but you're not listening. Um,
Yep. Amen.
I want to say thank you, of course, as always. Much success to Access to Freedom. I can
Thank
only
you.
imagine you as a survivor, you as a trans adoption. My goodness, you've got a lot of lived experiences that just by the nature of who you are
Yeah.
is going to transform things.
Thank you.
And I know you'll push, so that's good.
Thank you.
Pushing
I
is good.
appreciate it. Yes.
Um,
Every day.
I don't know. Let's see. I'm on Clubhouse. I have not been keeping up because the conversation has been so good.
You're
I
even on
apologize to
Clubhouse.
the.
That is like, I'm just amazed, Tina. You're doing all kinds of social media stuff. I'm over here like, I got Facebook. Sometimes I check.
Listen,
Yeah.
I have been, baptism by fire, so to speak. But let's see. Um, so
Hello, everyone. This is Tina. Um, Morgan is amazing, and she makes us have the conversations that maybe we don't want to have in regard to being a survivor in the Black community, in addition to being a survivor in the world. Um, I just want to say thank you again for tuning in. Um, we will be live tomorrow. I don't know how different I will look tomorrow, but this is what you see is what you get. Um, as I said earlier, you know, this podcast was designed to have conversations that are hard to have, hard to hear, hard to know, hard to believe, and sometimes hard to understand. But through her lived experiences and through our lived experiences, especially as survivors and as women, we should be working hard to come together. So I'll be back tomorrow night with my guest from Canada. Her name is Rose O'Neill. Um, she has quite a story of survival. On the 28th, we have some self defense and ways in which to protect yourself. On the 29th, we have the woman who was going to come on tonight, but she was ill. And I decided to do a rebroadcast because of my own surgery. And so she'll be here on the 29th, Nikki G. Sorry. And on the 30th, um, one of our own community, Kimmy, will be here. And on the 31st, we will round out with Gina. So we only have 5 more nights, which is amazing to me. We've covered a lot of ground this month, and I expect the next 5 days to be pretty intense. Um, Thank you, Gina and Patricia, Shirley. I thought I saw Karen over here. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kimmy, for the kind words. Um, I am going to go take some medicine and probably sleep some more. And I will see everyone tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to get to these 31 days if it kills us. And it might. I'm feeling okay. Just, I feel like I had Botox, but I didn't get the butt lift or the boob job. So, disappointed. But this will all, I'm sure, calm down. So, but I will see everyone back here tomorrow night. Thank you, Shirley. So, good night, everybody. And I'll see you tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Take care. Thank you to my moderators. Thanks, of course, for the love, the likes, the shares, the gifts. It all means something. And it means that survivors are being heard, that the stories are being shared. And I really appreciate that. And I'm going to go ahead and end us on TikTok. Thank you to my moderators, Sue and Mar, Cat Links, Angel. So take care. Good night. Thank you to everyone over here. I really appreciate it. We'll be back tomorrow night. I don't think I have any gauze, Paula. I just have stitches and a rinse. So that's it. So have a great night, and I'll see you tomorrow.